Yeah.
Hi, and welcome back to our final seminar of the day for the Nordic Film Music Days here in Berlin. Thank you so much for joining us, not least to you in the national hubs around the Nordic countries. Thank you so much. This final seminar is perhaps, I wouldn't say the most important one, is debatable, but something I feel many more composers should be aware of. And it's definitely the one with the sexiest title of the day, DSM Directive 18 to 23. And we have two distinguished guests. We have Kasper Lindhardt, who's the senior legal advisor with CODA, the Danish bureau, and Alfons Karabuda, who's the chairman of Skap, among other things. And I'll leave it to you to explain what this seminar is about, and I'll sit here with questions and take it away. Take it away, Alfons.
I think we'll start with Kasper this time, and I'll just join in on the first slide. So please, go ahead. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to be here too, and also to listen to the panels just before. It was great hearing about this stuff. We did prepare some slides. Okay, here they go. Thank you. But this is just to tell you a little bit about the European law that is about to become implemented in every member state of the European Union. And the sexy title DSM covers digital single market, and it's the directive covers different aspects of copyright in the digital age, and there's other very important issues as well. But today we decided to focus on these articles as they have strong impact on authors and not least composers. But Alfons agreed to do an introduction on why these rules came to place in first place. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here. And I want to remind you, some of you have heard this before, but you need to be reminded of the importance of these articles and also what we as film music composers can do in regards to changing the situation for ourselves when it comes to contractual possibilities and this through legislation. So what this basically is that we had a directive that was put on pause and people wanting to modernize it. But these people weren't us. There were more pirates wanting to modernize in a way that would dismantle copyright. They wanted 5 years limit for copyright. So when the work started again with the EU Commission, we as EXA took 12 countries of evidence from film music composers. Some of you were part of that. And in these evidence, we showed the truth and the reality that we work in. And we had evidence showing things that you know, with the coercive publishing, we showed them that we are so weak as a counterpart that we really didn't have a choice. When we met the vice president of the commission, we showed him an audio evidence with one of the heads of a German TV station saying that if you don't sign off your rights, the publishing rights, even though they didn't have any publishing activities, all of your publishing rights, you will never work for any of our stations again in your whole life. So that changed things, and this became the start of what we call the transparency triangle, now the articles 18 to 23. And Kasper will show you what they really contain. And maybe I can add on a bit, also seen from the perspective of how we as members of EU have or are implementing these, because we still have some obstacles and we have some really important formulations that really, if we are not able to change or maintain some of them, this directive will be watered down. But I'm positive. So we need to raise awareness. And Kasper, you start, and I'll be glad to add on.
Thank you. Next slide. Yes, that's right. This was the title of the directive, as I mentioned, and you can also see here that The directive was approved by the European institutions in April 2019, and actually usually you have a little more than 2 years to make it into your national law, but these articles are overdue in most member states for reasons I think I do not need to describe, but that means that there's actually at the moment a process going on, not only in Denmark, but in many other, which is where I live and work, but in many countries, working on talking to their local governments and presenting our views. And just as Alfons explained, this is a long battle, and the battle is far from over. Next slide, please. So what we got and what the beautiful work from Excess people, including Alfons, and the people working at the GESAC, which is the umbrella organization for the PROs within the European Union, managed to come up with rules safeguarding a right to appropriate and proportionate remuneration, proportionate to the success of the use of the works in place, and a right to transparency, meaning a right to knowledge on how your work is being used. We, for example, we at Coda, we experience problems sometimes with when there's a film composer who has made music for a feature film, and the film, we know that the film has been sold to being broadcast in other countries, but the film company, they won't tell us which countries, which means that we don't know which societies we have to tickle in order to get the proper information and to make sure that our members get the payment they deserve. So we need to have more transparency and to be able to act on behalf of the composers in order to get this information. And that goes also, of course, for you as composers, that you want to be able to contact your counterparts in these contracts and get all the information you need on where the film has been shown and how much money it has created, which might lead back to the earnings that you deserve. We also have in this directive this rule on contract adjustment, meaning that if you in the first place was only paid a very small amount, which we call a buyout, if you have agreed to have no further income from the music and you leave all the rights with the producer, that means that you could end up having a very small amount, and even though the movie has proven to be very successful, and in such cases you should be able to have an adjustment saying that this is actually a bestseller, what you would call, well, that's in the what you call it when you talk about novels, but the basic rule is that you could renegotiate the contract, and you can also, next slide please. You could also, but that's described in the later article, have an alternative dispute resolution mechanism, meaning that instead of going to the courts, you should have an easier and hopefully faster way to resolve a dispute regarding, for instance, a very poor payment from in the first place. In Denmark, we have a perfect example of bestseller clause, which would have, in a case where the Danish translator of the cartoon Tintin, he was very famous in his way of doing these translations, and he actually came up with wonderful original contributions to the Tintin universe, but he was paid off with just a lump sum per page, and they sold I don't know how many copies, and there was a court case, and they just said, okay, this is the contract. I mean, you will have no further payment, but that's a perfect example of a case that would have turned out differently if these rules were in place at the time. You should be aware that some of the articles, 19, 20, and 21, they are mandatory, which means that even though if you sign a contract which, for instance, does not give you the transparency mentioned in Article 19, or does not give you the right to renegotiate if the contract is seemingly unfair, then those terms in the contract, they will be void, meaning that they will these articles will be valid even though you've signed differently. That's a special legal construction saying that you cannot, just to protect it, just like a consumer is protected in some cases. Here you have a protection of the artists. But you should be aware that the Article 18 talking about this appropriate and fair remuneration is not a mandatory provision, meaning that you could actually still be faced with a buyout term in your contract, and it would be legal. So then you'd have to fight it through that dispute mechanism, but then that of course means that you will have the burden of proof in order to get a fair remuneration. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, this is something that is it's still a political fight in many member states, and actually within 10 days there will be a meeting within the European Council, meaning the governments of all the member states will meet, and they will talk about buyout mechanisms as this first half year of 2022. The French government is presidency of the Ministry of the Council, and they have put exactly buyout terms on the agenda, and it's very important for us to talk to our member states and deliver local evidence saying that this is important, so that of course the French presidency should work constructively on these matters. So this is actually very it's very urgent, and it's very timely that we have this conversation. Thank you. And then I think I will leave Alfons to elaborate a bit on what will happen now. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jesper, is it okay? So will you give me a few minutes?
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Great. So a few things. When we say that, for example, thank you, by the way, Kaspar, great presentation. When we say that the articles might not be mandatory, this is not, it doesn't need to be the truth. You actually can convince your member state to make them mandatory if you can convince them that this is needed in order to reach the goals of the directive. And this is what we're doing in Sweden. So it's not, it wouldn't be illegal for the Justice Department to put that in their provision. So this is, we still have a bit of a negotiation there as well. And we have other things as well. One thing might be good to say about Article 18. In Sweden, for example, we talk about the circumstances at the time of the agreement when it was signed. That's when you need to know if it was reasonable or not. But we, of course, argue that it has to go throughout the term of the agreement because circumstances change over time. That's one of the risks that we can see. And of course, I get the question often on, is it illegal with buyouts then when we implement this? And it's not black or white. The thing is that buyouts need to be handled in a way, just as Kasper said, if you are going to monitor whether or not a bestseller clause would come into place, you need to monitor how the usage is done, and you need to have that kind of transparency, and not like Epidemic Sound. You put music in a box and you don't really know who wrote it, and all the money goes to a company. So there will be changes in this. So that's one of the things. And we have another important thing as well, is that when we talk about Article 19 and the importance of transparency, and that they have to be transparent in how they use our music, there's a little risk there once again, because they talk about what is significant. And it's when you have something, a content that is significant, that you need to be transparent, and otherwise you might not have to be. And this is, of course, something that you could dispute. We know this in film. It might be the 3-minute actor, that puts in his 3 minutes that makes the whole film really famous, or of course the film music. So this is something that we need to work on and argue. And in Sweden, we have a bit of a problem also in how to make this, the mechanism of actually being able to not only be right, but you've got to get right in also you need some legal certainty in this. And this is something that we are working with also, because if we risk to have a process that would be expensive, we as authors, as individuals, often do not have that kind of funds, and we might not even go for trying to get what is ours through legal means. So this is very important for us to make sure that it would be easy and cheap, actually, to be able to state your rights. So I'll stay with that, and maybe we can answer some questions. Yes, Per, thank you.
Thank you, Alfons. Well, there are no questions yet, but could you explain just briefly, you mentioned EXA, could you just briefly explain what that is to the composers that might not know?
Well, EXA is the European Composer and Songwriter Alliance, and we were formed officially in 2007, and it's all the authors of music in Europe, and we have a united voice, and we have been quite successful in raising this voice, and really also being able to gather other areas like the journalists, writers, directors. We formed a group. EXA initiated a group called the Authors Group, and together with the Authors Group and also close collaboration with JESAC, as Kaspar said, we were able to have a very firm and strong lobbying. So EXA is working now on legal issues, but also looking at new technology and also making sure that we create a good environment for anyone creating music, regardless of genre or which country you come from.
Thank you, Alfons. Is there anything that the composers watching can do to help implement these articles in their respective member states? I
think if I just answer very quickly, one thing that Kaspar mentioned is very important, and this is something that is being pushed by the French. And I think you're on something there. We should look at our French colleagues, and we should also look at the fact that they succeeded with something that we need in our countries. And that is when we get the giants, often from the United States, trying to impose their laws, saying that this is basically US, because we are US and the company is, so you need to abide by US law, but we might not have to, or we shouldn't. And the French actually now have a law saying that their law is not valid. It's actually the French law regarding buyouts that should be the one taken in. That is really what France is abiding by. So this could be very important for us, because we all know as film music composers, they come to us and say that this is praxis, this is the US, this is the way we do it. And then you as colleagues should say, if not no, you should say, just wait a minute, I'll answer you tomorrow if they ask you a question. And then you can ask your colleagues, you can ask Kaspar, Koda, you can ask EXA, and make sure that you have strength behind you and not feeling forced to just accept something. That's important.
Thank you, Alfons. Another thing I know that many composers deal with is this coercive publishing that you talked about. Is this also included in the new directive? Does that remedy sort of some of the contracts that's been made already, or is there a way to talk about this?
Is it okay, Kaspar, if I just do? I see that you raise your hand, so I think that Kaspar wants the word. Let me just very briefly, and maybe Kaspar could add on that as well. There is one thing. You actually put a responsibility on our counterparts. They need actually to do something in order to acquire our rights. And you cannot just as a TV station or a film company say that we want your publishing rights when you are not doing the work of a publisher, because you need to show and there will not be, it won't be enough just saying that, well, I made a phone call 3 years ago. So, but I'll leave to Kaspar maybe to elaborate on that as well. But yes, the answer is yes.
Yes, there's 3 points, and the last one being referring to what Alfons just said. But you started out, Jesper, saying that if there was anything the composers could do right now, and I think actually what we at Coda have done together with our local branch of this BFM, a local branch of this conference, we have an anonymous contracts with examples of buyout contracts and the like. And the French presidency of the council I just mentioned before, they actually have sent out a questionnaire to member states asking, do you know of any practices that could be contrary to the way we usually do contracts in Europe? And we, based on these anonymous contracts, you could say, yes, we have seen examples in contracts of this and that. And in that way, we are providing bullets for the political argument that this is an important issue that should be dealt with. So that's a very practical thing you could do. Talk to your PRO and deliver contracts because you know that this questionnaire is running. But you should be very fast, as the meeting is, I think, in the beginning of actually not the coming week, but the next week. So this is a very urgent matter. That's one thing. Another thing, and that is from reading these contracts that we've seen, we can see that it seems that some of the big streaming services, they actually are beginning to take these new provisions in the directive into account, meaning that they have left the strong US buyout principles and are turning more into these, as you mentioned, cohesive publishing agreements. And I totally agree with what Alfons just said. Whenever somebody shows you a draft for I want you to sign a publishing agreement, you should say, okay, but that requires that you have a publishing department. You should have somebody working actively to promote my works, because that is what a publisher does for his or her share of the remuneration. And I should also say that Coda, as all other PROs, we represent both the composers, the songwriters, and the music publishers. And in the beginning, we were hesitant to enter into the lobbying of this 18 to 23, as we saw, well, there's also a contract between the composer and the music publisher. But then we found out that what is the we have a common threat that we need to deal with, which is the buyout, because that means that everybody in the PROs, regardless of their composers or publishers, they will lose the repertoire, they will lose the right to remuneration. And basically, at least in Denmark, I think that most music publishers, they comply with they have some sort of decency, and they would, in their normal business manners, they would be compliant with these articles anyway. So we have managed to persuade them into being part of this, which is not, I think, the case when you talk to music performers, whereas IFPI, they've been against this part of the directive from its early days. Thank you.
Someone is writing something. It says 4 minutes, and that's plenty of time for you in the national hubs to ask a question, because this is important, and this is important to all of us. And no wonder if you're not really comprehending the everything that Kasper and Alfons is talking about, because it is difficult. But until there is a question, I'll just ask you guys. It's one thing for an established composer who's done many products with films with a director and a production company. But what about upcoming composers who are then presented with a contract that is seemingly unfair, but they want to do the project, and they're told, well, if you don't sign this, we'll just ask someone else. I mean, in their shoes, does the directive help at all in this case? And what can they do?
If I can answer that, I would say that there are many, in many ways, I would say. One of the things, though, is that with these articles, we, of course, expect and hope our counterparts to act differently already from the beginning, because they know that it will cost them if it doesn't. So when we talk about the bestseller clause, for example, they might at least not want to have the fees and the remuneration so low that they actually they have to get back to renegotiating. So if they have it on a gray scale, so to say, they might be better off. So I think that they will think about this already in the beginning, and this will benefit also the younger ones, the new composers. But once again, as a new composer, you can just very politely say that the coffee was great that they gave you, even if it's not, and then you just take the contract back and say that I'll just have a look at it and I'll get back. And then you contact your organization, because collective power behind you is necessary, especially when you're new. And the collective power is our author organizations, but it's also our collecting societies as Coda, STIM, Teosto, Tono, all of these, and Steph. So we have all of these are there to help you, and they are member organizations. So make use out of them. It's difficult to handle this by yourself.
So is there one place all the composers could go to learn more about this, or is it the national PRO they should contact?
I think it's a good start to do it in your own country. It's easy. You have both your collecting society and your author organizations. And then you also, of course, will be able to, through them, reach international help. And also the colleagues, because we have a huge network. We work with our American colleagues. We work in Europe. So I think that as also the collecting societies and the PROs, CMOs do through JSAC in Europe and also CSAC globally. So this is a huge strength. So I think that that's the best way. And then, of course, you shouldn't just look at your contract or your own contract. You should be active in also changing through your organizations. So being an active colleague and helping others, that's something that I really would recommend, because you would need it and we all need that kind of effort.
Thank you very much, Alfons. Kasper, anything to add?
Yeah, I think as a young composer getting close to a first assignment, there's three things that you should say. One is, as Alfons said, thank you for the coffee. Let me think about it, and get back and one, there's two things that I think when you have consulted your network, talk to your organizations, there's two things that you should say. One is, as Alfons mentioned, but if you give me too bad, if my conditions are very, very bad, it might be quite easy for me to have them reopened through these mechanisms in the directive, because I have a right for contract adjustment if it turns out that this was unfair. And that is, it might be, in the first place, it might be a good thing for the producer to have your rights for a jelly bean. But if it turns out that later on they have to renegotiate and it becomes complicated, and if they want to sell the movie or sell the rights of the movie to somebody else, they cannot be sure that there might be somebody who might come up with a claim which might turn out to be valid, and all this legal uncertainty left with the producer who's actually started out with just being unfair. That's not a good thing for the producer. So you could say it is also in your long-term best interest to give me fair conditions.
Thank you very much, Kasper.
I think that's quite important.
Yeah. Sadly, we are running out of time, and I just want to thank you, Kasper, and you, Alfons, for joining us here today. And to all of you watching at home, the bad news is that this was the last seminar. The good news is that you have 3 hours to brush up on the directive before we meet again. 5 or 10 minutes to 7, the what's it called in Zoom? The Zoom room? The room. The place where you all meet will be open, and then the award show will start at 7. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Kasper. Thank you, Alfons.